Hi everyone and welcome back. If you have not tuned into our previous lessons, I strongly suggest that you go back and do so. If you are tuning in for the very first time, hi, my name is Lauren. I work for a group in Lancaster, Pennsylvania called Compass Mark. We provide a program to schools in our area called Leaders of Future Generations. And since we are all stuck at home for the remainder of the school year, we thought that we would bring our lessons to you. I also would strongly suggest that you share these videos with anyone that you know has kids at home looking for something to do, or anyone that you really think would enjoy or benefit from watching them. Okay, so let's get started. Over the last couple weeks, we have been talking about two very important topics, and those topics are conflict and bullying. When we discussed conflict, we walked ourselves through what escalates a conflict, how to de-escalate a conflict, and then how to actually solve the conflict. When we discussed bullying, we talked about how to recognize it and know that it's bullying, how to refuse it, and then how to properly report it. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that has to do with both of those topics, but we also see it in a lot of other ways in our lives too. And that topic is violence. But first, let's start with our quote. Our quote comes from the one and only Gandhi. And Gandhi said, "An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind." Okay, we'll come back to that later. So when you first hear the word violence, what do you think of? Think about it for a second. What comes to mind when you hear the word violence? I don't know about you, but for me, I think of gore and really like scary physical stuff. I think about like hitting, kicking, hurting, pushing. I think of weapons. I even think of zombies. I think of like really gruesome stuff, violence, right? Because that's what we know, that's what we think about when we hear that word. But is violence always physical? No. In fact, a lot of violence that happens is not physical. We can experience violence that is verbal, physical, or even psychological, something that kind of messes with the other person's head or their emotions. But bottom line, violence is any kind of intentional harm done to another person. So that kind of sounds like we're talking about bullying again, right? Because bullying, we know, is a repeated aggressive behavior intended to hurt someone. So that intention piece is still there. Of course, this was done because they wanted to hurt someone, okay? But the difference is that violence doesn't have to be repeated to be considered violence, okay? Whereas bullying, we discussed, is that more targeted attack on someone. But a violent behavior is something that could just happen one time, but it's done with the purpose of harming someone else. And again, that's not always physical. It could be with our words or things that we say to other people. It could be psychological, such as making someone feel rejected or making them feel, lowering someone else's self-esteem. Okay, lots of different things, unfortunately. The thing that I really want to drive home today is that violence is harmful to everyone. When we think of a violent situation, and I'm going to walk you through one in a little bit here, we tend to think of the aggressor and the victim as the only people who could experience a consequence or experience a negative result from experiencing this violent event. But the truth is that there's this whole other group of people who get affected by violence, and those are the witnesses, the people who see and hear violent things happening. Okay, so we are going to go through a situation today that hopefully you can relate to, at least on your age level there for violence. This is an unfortunate thing that maybe you have actually witnessed in your social settings, or maybe not, or maybe you've just seen it depicted in a movie before, and that's fine too. Okay, so we're going to go through this, and I want you to really think about not just the two people involved in the violence, but everyone else, including yourself in the story, okay? All right, so let's walk through a violent situation. Let's say everyone in your class is invited to a party Friday night at Eric's house. Eric has made it pretty clear to everyone that his parents are going to be out of town. It's been rumored all week that Jesse and Adam, two kids in your grade, are going to fight each other at the party. Apparently, one of them was seen with the other one's girlfriend. You're hesitant about going to the party because you know that his parents aren't home and that this fight might break out, but you decide to check it out anyway. When you get to the party, everyone at the party is feeling very on edge. There's like a level of excitement going on. There's lots of rumors. Everyone's talking about this possible fight that might break out. You see Adam sulking in the corner, when you notice that Jesse just entered the party. Adam gets up and immediately goes over to confront him. It seems almost immediate that the crowd of kids start to surround Adam and Jesse, chanting, "Fight, fight, fight." The room is filled with cheering and yelling and chanting. You start to feel excited too, like something's happening that you need to watch or you need to be a part of. But you also feel nervous and scared, and you realize that this is something abnormal. This is something that you're not used to seeing happening. You don't know what's going to happen. Jesse then says something threatening to Adam, and that's all it takes for Adam to take a swing at Jesse. The boys fight while the crowd continues to cheer. Lamps break and fall on the floor, food spills all over the carpet, and before you know it, the fight is completely out of control. Whoa. That's quite the situation. I hope none of you have ever been a witness to that, but I know that I've seen that depicted on a movie at least before, so we can kind of relate in that way. This situation escalated very quickly. When we think back to how it started, first of all, we don't know very much information about the whole Jesse Adam girlfriend situation, right? We don't really know if any of it's even true. All we know is that we heard a rumor, and that's probably all that the other kids at this party know too, is that they heard a rumor about these guys and that they might fight each other. And then this excitement started to stir up in everybody. Okay, so it went from a very small rumor to a very serious, violent fight pretty quickly. So let's think through some of the consequences here. Let's start with the aggressor and the victim, so Adam and Jesse. Now, what could happen to them? We don't know the end of the story here, so what could possibly happen to them? Well, the most obvious, they could get hurt, right? So they could get seriously injured. They could get into trouble, okay? They could have broken something valuable. They maybe could have hurt somebody else at the party unintentionally. They could now have a reputation at school for being violent, and people might be afraid of them. And they could even be filled with feelings of guilt or regret. Something that we don't always think about, but let's say Adam hurts Jesse real bad, and he breaks his arm or something really serious and hurts him really, really badly. I believe that he will be filled with feelings of guilt and regret. And he will have to deal with that, knowing that he seriously harmed someone to the extent of them not being able to use their arm or being really seriously injured. So that's something that we don't always consider, but these consequences, they have lasting effects on not just the person who got hurt, but the person who did the hurting. Another thing we have to understand too, and I think I mentioned this in my last lesson on bullying, is that just because something happens outside of school doesn't mean that you won't get in trouble in school. So we live in a world where everyone pulls out their smartphones when anything interesting is happening. And it's very possible that some kids at the school started to film this fight. And if it gets filmed, then these boys can definitely get in trouble for what happened at this fight, right? They could definitely get in trouble for what went on, okay? But what about the other people in the room? Could they have consequences too? They weren't fighting, right? But yes, they absolutely can. So witnesses to violent situations can experience consequences. Maybe they might get hurt in the fight. Okay, sounds like standing pretty closely to it. They could get into trouble. So believe it or not, if you're caught on that film that goes viral and your principal or your teacher see it, you could get in trouble too, just for being there and not doing anything about it. Another consequence is that they witnessed the violence. So what does that do to someone who witnesses violence, who just sees it happening, who has to experience watching or hearing a violent situation? Unfortunately, witnesses can be filled with something called PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. All you really need to know is that it's when we experience these feelings of fear, stress, and sadness, and they stick with us. So even long after this fight is over, the witnesses might now have a sense of fear. They might feel traumatized. They might feel like this could happen again, and now they're worried about it. So we have to consider that could also have a lasting effect on just us at the party. So the students at the party were chanting for this fight to happen. Why do you think that is? Do you think that they actually wanted one of these kids to get seriously injured? No, I would really hope not. I don't think so. Unfortunately, many of these kids were probably influenced by their peers to participate in the chanting. It might even be possible that some of the kids at this party had no idea what was going on, right? They just were going to the party to hang out with their friends. And all of a sudden this fight's going on and they might be influenced to start chanting along. Unfortunately, that tends to be how we see violent events, because we take in events of violence all the time when we watch movies, TV shows, or even video games. We have to consider that the violence we see on media is not exactly realistic. So when these kids were watching this fight happening, they probably weren't thinking through the consequences of what could actually happen to these kids. They weren't actually thinking about them getting in trouble or getting hurt. When we defined violence, did we include words like glamorous, exciting, or thrilling? No, of course not. We said intentional harm to someone else. We understand that violence is hurtful, it's harmful, and it has lasting effects on every single person involved. However, the way that we witness violence is not always shown in a harmful way. Take this, for example. Here's another story for you. A man is walking down the street when suddenly he is hit by a passing truck. What happens next? Well, you'd probably say that he's badly injured. Okay, getting hit by a truck, probably pretty badly injured. The man in the truck hopefully stopped his car and called 911 and help is on his way. However, our story is a little bit different. In this story, the man gets hit by the passing truck, but he stands up, dusts himself off, holds his right arm up in the air, and flies off into the sky. Now, does that sound realistic? Of course not. We understand that there is no possible way that that's actually what would happen in this situation. However, would it make a really interesting movie if we watched the guy go to the ER and maybe have surgery and recover, and that would be our whole movie? Probably not. So instead, in media, we watch a lot of things that are very unrealistic because they're more exciting or more thrilling. So even in video games, let's say your character gets injured. Maybe all you have to do is eat a protein bar or wrap your hand, and suddenly your health is completely back to normal. Or even if you die in a video game, you can usually simply just go back to where you were and start again. But is that how life works? No, definitely not. If we view violent situations as situations that will not end with serious consequences, then we forget how serious these situations are and that they actually really affect people. The kids at this party were not thinking about Adam or Jesse ending up in the hospital or being seriously injured, but they very well could have been. When we witness unrealistic violent situations through movies and TV and video games, we start to become desensitized. We don't realize that this is actually a really serious thing, that if this were to happen in real life, the consequences would be completely different. So another example of this is reality TV. Reality TV specifically that shows conflict. So let's think about this. This would involve shows like Jerry Springer, I might be dating myself here a little bit, or Maury, or even shows that show people's lives like Real Housewives or The Bachelor. These shows purposefully amp up the violence or the conflict. In a show like Jerry Springer, it would be very boring if people sat down and discussed their conflicts and solved them peacefully. But I don't know if anyone would want to watch that. And why is that? Because we like to be entertained. We like to watch things that are thrilling and dangerous or different from what we're used to. We want to sit there and have that wow factor of what we're watching. That's what gets good ratings. That's what gets people to watch it. But we still have to understand that that's not realistic, right? We don't go around solving our conflicts by hurting each other or, throwing chairs over or whatever it might be on those shows. I also want you to think about in these shows like Jerry Springer, for example, when these individuals do start to fight and argue and it gets out of control, because it always does, what does the crowd do? Do they sit there calmly and say, oh my gosh, please stop fighting? No, they get up and cheer. They cheer, they clap their hands, they chant. What does this tell us, the viewers at home? If we see violence happening and we hear cheers, that's telling us at home that this is good. That whatever we're seeing, this violence, this arguing, is actually good and should happen again. But that's ridiculous. We know, and as we've learned from our previous lessons, that solving conflict like that is not going to get us anywhere. It's going to make the conflict get bigger, out of control. It's going to escalate, and it's probably going to ruin some friendships. Or if it turns into violence, like Jesse and Adam's situation, it could end up with someone getting seriously hurt. Now, I'm not here to tell you to stop watching your favorite TV show or playing your favorite video game. But you have to be aware of the impact that witnessing these violent situations does on your outlook on violence. Violent events, unfortunately, do happen, and they're not celebrated. We can't just dust ourselves off and fly off into the sky. Violence has serious consequences that can affect everyone in the situation, the aggressor, the victim, and yes, even those who just watch it happening, like the victims. As a leader, understanding what violence is really important and how it affects others, not only so that you could stop a violent situation if you were to see it starting, but also so that you could show empathy to those who might witness the violent experience or be a part of the violent experience. Being able to understand that these are really serious events, and any kind of violence, verbal, psychological, or physical, is going to have lasting effects on everyone involved. So let's take a look back at our quote today from Gandhi. Gandhi said, "An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind." Okay. So what I think Gandhi is trying to tell us is that when we approach violent situations, whether they are escalated conflicts with others, bullying situations, or violent events, we have to be the bigger person. If we continue to support or cheer on the violence, then the violence is going to continue. If we combat the violence with more violence, an eye for an eye, for example, then it's just going to keep in this cycle, right? So it's going to, it's like bullying the bully back, right? It's what they were looking for to happen. So we have to be the change. We have to be the ones who stand up against violence. We have to know the difference between realistic and unrealistic violence and understand that in the real world, violence has serious consequences. It's not the same thing as some kind of superhero movie where violence means nothing. Okay, so I would strongly urge you to reevaluate the shows and the things that you watch. And I'm not telling you not to watch them, but just consider that they're not exactly realistic depictions of violence. So speaking of, our discussion questions for today. Number 1, I want you to name an unrealistic depiction of violence you've seen on TV, in a movie, or in a video game. So this is one thing that happens, okay? And just a little hint here, superhero movies are filled with them. Okay, so some kind of unrealistic violent event that you've seen depicted in the media. So you knew that, like, if this happened in real life, it would be completely different, okay? Number 2, what consequences, if any, were there for those involved? So again, think about not just the two people involved in the conflict or the two groups or two sides, but all the other people who witness it or who are a part of it. And number 3, I want you to go back to our story about Jesse and Adam, and I want you to try to figure out what the warning signs were. So what are the warning signs that led to this fight happening? If we were to go back and reevaluate our choice in going to that party, are there things that could have warned us that we shouldn't go or that this was going to be out of control? Okay, now for your at-home activity, I would like you to choose one of your unrealistic depictions of violence that you've seen in TV, in a movie, or a video game. So you can use the one that you talk about in the discussion question if you want. And I want you to rewrite the end of that story, but with more realistic consequences. So what could actually happen if Batman and the Joker, this thing didn't happen, but this thing did happen? Okay, so how could it actually have ended if this really happened in the real world? Okay, explain and discuss this with a friend or family member. What actually would have happened if this event had happened in real life? I would love to hear your answers. I think this is really interesting, and I would love to hear what depiction you think of. So please share it with me. You can comment below, or at least share it with someone in your home or your friends. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson on violence, and I hope that you tune into future lessons. I hope that you're well, safe, and I look forward to connecting with you soon.